Hello and welcome to CX Today. My name is Charlie. I'm the senior editor here at CX Today, and today I am joined by Nick Dixie, CPaaS Specialist at Avaya UK and Ireland. How are you doing, Nick? It's great to have you join us. How are you doing today?
Hi, Charlie. I'm very well, thank you, and thanks for inviting me along today.
Yeah, it's really great to talk to you and to discuss virtual agents. I mean, this is kind of a really evolving topic within the CX space. It's great to hear your thoughts on it. But I think the first place I really want to begin is with some research that I found kind of before this conversation that dates back to February 2019. And it's from Forrester, and it states that 54% of US online consumers believe that interacting with a chatbot will have a negative impact on their overall quality of life. This research is now obviously a little bit dated, and I was kind of wanted to put to you kind of what earned virtual agents that sort of reputation, and why is the situation better now?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I mean, I think a lot of it in the beginning, typically that many virtual agents, as such, were poorly conceived and implemented, almost like an unintelligent IVR capability. Um, and I think ultimately, without understanding what the business outcomes were needed to be delivered on, not using the right integration capability or even having the ability to leverage the AI better so that you used the intents and access to the knowledge that were going to deliver those right outcomes, I think made the experience really frustrating for a lot of customers, and customers ended up speaking to ultimately to an agent anyway. So going beyond the virtual agent, speaking to an agent anyway, with that frustration and that poor experience that they would then obviously, um, you know, tell the poor agent about, because they've been frustrated with what should have been a seamless experience and an intuitive experience being ill conceived and I think just poorly implemented. I think that's driven a lot of frustration. So I think what a lot of organizations then looked at doing was to simplifying that, not to overcomplicate the virtual agent, and actually simplify it and look at, understand what the outcomes were that you wanted that virtual agent to deliver to your customers.
Mm. Yeah, I think there's lots of interesting points. I mean, first and foremostly, of course, as you mentioned at the start of that, technology's kind of improved. Maybe, well, maybe even further back than 2019, there was just kind of a bit of natural language understanding and then a lot of script-based models. But now, kind of solutions like the Avaya solution are much more sophisticated with that than that, using kind of natural language processing and machine learning. But then also how the kind of thought leadership around virtual agents, as you also discussed, has improved, is becoming quite interesting too. I think kind of to add more perspective to this conversation, I was just wondering like which brand has a virtual agent that from a consumer's standpoint really stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not able to kind of mention their name specifically, but they're a manufacturer and a retailer. So it's a fairly long-standing Avaya customer through the pandemic, were actually had a real spike in sales. So they specialize in household appliances. And what they wanted to do was to focus more of their contact center agents on sales as opposed to post sales. And typically what they did to help customers before the pandemic around post sales was to actually talk to customers, was to actually get the appliance, because most of these appliances are fairly mobile handheld appliances, get those appliances and actually then talk through what the problem was that the customer was facing. And those conversations, this was all driven over voice. So a lot of these conversations typically would be between 10 and 15 minutes in length. So quite, long conversations that the agent was having. So the average handling time was high. But what that meant was that if a lot of agents were then involved in some of those post sales conversations with their customers, they weren't able to respond to sales inquiries and orders and things like that. So what they then decided to do was look at how a virtual agent could help them deliver the same experience, but in a completely automated way. So they looked at the product range, they looked at the analytics behind, different calls with they were getting on different products, you know, common problems, looking at the knowledge that they had, the knowledge bases they had around those products as well. Because as I've said before, you know, fundamentally we're lazy, and even though the information could be right there in front of us, we typically don't like going to find it and trying to sort of sort it out for ourselves. So, you know, if we're short on time, you know, other pressures will call up, and we'll obviously want to speak to somebody who can help us sort of guide our way through it. So they took all of that good knowledge, FAQs, PDFs, etc., and made that available within their virtual agent. So typically, a customer would go onto the website and look to see if they could get the number for the organization to call up. But actually, when they were going to different product pages or contact pages, getting a chatbot come up with some very clearly defined options that the customer could literally just click on and go, oh, okay, that's my problem, or that's what I need to speak to somebody about. Excuse me. And they made that very intuitive. um, they sort of structured it in such a way that they knew what products were that customers called most often about, and therefore started to look at ways and means of making that information more available, more directly available to those customers. And that actually deflected a lot of traffic away from people calling into the contact center and speaking to an agent. And it went from 6 defined intents to about 14. And that wasn't because of scope creep or anything else. They just realized the power of what they could do within this virtual agent solution and wanted to add other capabilities to it. And it was so successful as a pilot, as a proof of concept and proof of value within the UK, that they looked at sort of doing something very similar in local language in other countries, so that literally it was something that they could replicate without having to take on board additional agents or train people differently. They literally could roll out a global solution, even though the main sort of hub of skills and knowledge was in the UK. They literally could localize this and offer it on, you know, in many other territories where they physically didn't have the same level of expertise as they had in the UK. So it was incredibly powerful, and it was really nice to see the customer using it, using that capability, using the technology, structuring it properly, really getting to understand or knowing what outcomes they wanted to deliver to their customers without losing any of the quality of service that they'd given their customers previously by speaking to an agent. And of course, what that allowed them to do was then prioritize their agents on, you know, new sales orders, etc. So it's a really great way of being able to use that technology to kind of shift priorities and meet demands in other areas.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of really fascinating insights in there, all the way from kind of getting to grips with customer behavior, and how that influences how a chatbot could handle a query, and not just kind of the easiest process flow, all the way to kind of digging into your demand drivers to lift up to surface even um,
And
news.
yeah, and actually, interestingly, they used it to actually help drive additional sales as well. So if the particular product you had consumable items associated with it, they actually built in an opportunity to then say to the customer, actually, do you need anything? Do you need any more consumable items for your appliance? And actually, they used it to start actually driving sales. So, you know, rather than the customer having to go from, you know, a chatbot to another part of the website, they all built it within there. So not only was there the ability to resolve issues and provide great customer service, but it was also a sales channel as well. So that worked really, really well for them. And again, not sort of taking the time up from the agents being able to do that, but simplifying the customer's journey and the customer's experience was quite powerful.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's particularly kind of fascinating how they were able to kind of expand the proposition over time. But in terms of where a brand should start when putting together such kind of a successful virtual agent initiative, like that example, what kind of advice would you have to kick off a project like this?
Yeah, I think it's sort of building on from what I said previously about just if there are certain activities, certain tasks that you want your agents to do less of, or you could think about ways of being able to prioritize your agents differently, use those as the basis on which you can build your virtual agent capability, because typically agents might handle a lot of information based interactions with customers, and therefore if the information is available but you make it far more easy, more easy for the customer to get, and you can either, as I explained before in the previous use case, use a bot, or even if a customer still calls in, using digital deflection, so deflect the customer to another channel, perhaps it's a social media messaging channel, or even SMS. You can start to streamline then the number of interactions that your agents deal with on a day-to-day basis, and use that to be able to help them prioritize and perhaps what the kind of bigger business priorities are.
Mm.
Because as I mentioned before, typically customers won't look at FAQs, knowledge bases online, and will want to speak to somebody at the end of the day. Certainly, I guess, certain demographics within the population will do that. And all too often you hear IVRs, fairly classic standard IVRs say, if you want more information, go to our website at www, whatever it might be, and check out the information there. But it tends not to be specific. So, you then start to put some real intelligence behind what the virtual agent can do. You can take the customer, you can give the customer specific information, again, without having to speak to an agent. So you can message them, you can text them that specific information, embed that information that they can just click on and get to. It could be a smart form, it could be a portal, it could be whatever you want to put into that channel, into that deflection. And so you encourage your customers to self-serve more. And if you make that experience seamless and intuitive and relatively easy, it just grows. It grows. Customers trust it. They get the results they need from it. And it becomes something where, as an organization, you can make real transformational changes towards how you might be able to digitize your customer journey. Even though it sounds very, very basic, these things do actually make a big difference. So I would say, think about the less complex processes, and build that as a kind of foundational point within your sort of virtual agent journey, if you will, and what your customer experience will be. Because I think a great customer experience will lead to great employee experience, because your employees now have a sort of a different focus, but because perhaps more of the sort of transactional interactions have been taken away from them. So what they actually get to do is obviously the more sort of business driven stuff that the business wants them to do, whether or not that's sales, revenue, whatever it might be, customer retention, for example. It starts to change their experience of working within that organization, and can make it really more enjoyable, and you see real tangible results from that.
Yeah, I think also that kind of approach that you discussed is a particularly good way of also building a business case right at the start. Kind of the process of kind of looking at the kind of contact drivers and kind of working through them and quantifying the impact that might have, not only on the customer experience but also to business results and maybe to agents as
Yeah.
well. I thought there was lots of really
and
fascinating
and
in.
if you yeah, thank you. And if you then think about, if you want to layer on complexity, then if you've already got the great foundation there already, it allows you to do that. And again, if customers are using it and trust it, then if you add things like automated payments, for example, within that virtual agent capability, or making bookings and appointments, or checking on delivery timescales, you're expanding that trust even more, because if you get that piece right as well, you've already got a really well-oiled virtual agent machine working there. You start layering on that complexity that then starts to again help your total experience from both a customer, an employee, and a user perspective. It really starts to kind of make it really interesting. And as I said, helps a lot of organizations really start to embrace digital transformation, just by taking that kind of great foundation you can build and just kind of layering it on top. I think going back to the first question we talked about, Why did it fail? I think a lot of times organizations over engineered or overthought what the virtual agent was going to be doing. And therefore, I think when they looked at the scale and scope of that, got it wrong. Going back to the poor implementation because it was overcomplicated, over engineered. Um, I think if you get the foundation right and you layer on top of that, I think that's really where lots of organizations can get the value out of it.
Yeah, and I think as well, in terms of adding those layers to a chatbot, the easy kind of integrations that kind of a CCaaS solution can do, and also kind of integrations with a payment system, as you suggested, or kind of a delivery tracking, order management system, payment and CRM system. I think there's so many more use cases that you can build along the way, and really kind of build into something that's really quite sophisticated. I think that's really interesting, but kind of you talked a little bit there about kind of some of the mistakes,
Mm.
a mistake almost that is easy to fall into. I don't know if there are any kind of other mistakes or misconceptions that you often see brands all kind of fall into the trap of making when
Well,
implementing an agent.
yeah, I guess you should never look at a virtual agent completely replacing your contact center, your agents. They're hugely valuable. It should always be seen to complement what your contact center is set out to do, what your processes are, etc. It's got to be complementary to that. And I think not only are we all fixated on customer experience, but if you use it as an opportunity, as I said before, to really focus on the employee experience, what you get is a total experience capability that I think can really differentiate an organization. So overcomplicating it, over engineering it is a pitfall, is a danger. I think, look at ways that you use a virtual agent capability to complement what you want to do, how you want to drive your agents, what the virtual agent can take away from your agents from a transactional perspective. Don't you can't assume that the virtual agent is always going to be able to replace the more complex processes, but if you still keep the human element for that as well as the more emotional side of things, because we can infuse AI into that virtual agent, and we can infuse things like sentiment analysis so that the virtual agent has the ability then to say, okay, I have an unhappy customer here. This person needs to speak to an agent. If you make that, as I said before, fluid and intuitive, it may almost take the sting out of the customer being frustrated and perhaps, unfortunately berating the agent. If you make that intuitive and it's a gradual, okay, we want to change this, we want to improve this, it can add so much more, even though ultimately the customer's still going to speak to an agent. Trying to take the sort of sting out of it can easily be done, but you've got to do it right.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's you made a lot of really good points there as well, and kind of in an earlier part of that answer as well, you kind of referenced kind of the building of towards a total experience, which I think is a big CX trend that's going along now. And I did see some interesting Avaya research on that, so I might put that in the description box below. But I think, yeah, as I said, I've learned a lot from this conversation. I was just wondering if you had any kind of final insights that maybe you haven't kind of given us yet, for a company ready to embark on a virtual agent project.
Yeah, I think don't always. I mean, I think a lot of organizations kind of approach this thinking that they needed to build everything from the ground up. And I think what organizations should do is look at the options available. And I have to obviously talk about Avaya and the fact that Avaya Virtual Agent as an off-the-shelf software as a service application can be just as effective as building your own virtual agent capability. Um, Again, think about the outcomes you want the virtual agent to deliver to your customers and how it's going to drive the total experience for everybody. Um, I think, off-the-shelf solutions like Avaya Virtual Agent has got a great set of capabilities. It's very intuitive. It's menu driven, so it's easy to set up. You can set up a virtual agent within 30 seconds to a minute. That's how intuitive it is. You can build integration into that. You can integrate AI capabilities into that as well. So I'd say don't always think that it's something that you have to build yourselves. There are a lot of great solutions out there, and we have one of those. and as I say, it's not only something you can build um, that complements, you can build it and integrate it into what you have today, not only from a front end contact center perspective, but also into a back end business application perspective as well. But think about those outcomes. Think about what you really want to drive from a complete total experience perspective. Um, Again, don't always think that the VA, and this is a pitfall that happened before, where the virtual agent is going to replace the agent. Absolutely not. It will complement what they do, how they do it. It will take pressure away from your human agents. And we saw lots and lots of organizations struggling, because of the pandemic and the pressure put on their human resource to deal with, particularly sensitive situations as a result of that. But if it's really well executed, a virtual agent can take an awful lot of pressure from that human resource. And ultimately, if the customer doesn't need to speak to an agent and they can self-serve and help themselves and have an enjoyable automated experience, then I think it's a great solution that all organizations, regardless of the vertical, the industry they work in, could benefit from a really well designed, executed virtual agent capability.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I love that idea of kind of thinking of how it can complement the human agent, even if it's just at the front of the system, just automating ID and V processes, maybe, or kind of or sharing information with an agent as well. And I know there's kind of a lot of agent assist out there as well. But yeah, I think this again a lot of very fascinating insights. And I think that's a great place to end today's conversation. So thank you very much, Nick, for joining me.
Thanks, Charlie. Appreciate it.
Excellent. And thank you everybody for watching. Bye for now and see you again soon.